So the phenomenon is also happening in the States, where more and more firms are moving away from the physical storefront or tower office to the virtual law firm, using reduced overhead and technology to radically change the pricing model and the means of delivering legal services. Now, in the US, practicing across borders is much more difficult. In England, they don't have that phenomenon because it's a unitary state. In the US, lawyers can only practice in states in which they are licensed. And I'm showing you two examples here of two law firms, VLP Law Group and Fisher Broyles, both virtual law firms, both practicing in multiple states with lawyers who are licensed to practice in those states. And again, the phenomenon is quite similar to what I described in the United Kingdom. But if you look at the slides, you can see how they describe that they are radically changing the way that law is practiced. And so they are holding that expectation out to their clients, to the public, and to the profession, in effect saying, what you all do is no longer acceptable. It is time for radical change. So all of this results in law being practiced on the internet. So most of what I've described are looking at different means of communication, different means of getting information, different means of relating to clients. But that's not real law practice. We are seeing as well the introduction of law firms that actually conduct their practices via the internet. They practice virtually, using the internet not only to communicate with clients, but to actually do the client's work. Lawyers Conveyancing is an Australian law firm that does real estate practice almost completely online. And what's fascinating about the entity is that they're proud to hold out the notion that you can complete your real estate transaction without ever having to come face to face with a lawyer. It's what I said earlier about the net generation. This is a real live example of how all the forms can be produced online, can be executed online, can be delivered online with the funding mechanism behind it so that the client never has to come in to see the lawyer in the office. In the language that I referred earlier and that Susskind used, this is a clear example of clients preferring clicks to mortals. And finally, just to keep us all alert, I speak about law without lawyers. Let me just get through this slide and then I'll come to law without lawyers. So, again, we're seeing a number of examples where very sophisticated services are being provided that are, in effect, law practice, but without actually using lawyers. And elawyer.com is an example in the area of estate planning and management. So it's a place where lawyers can actually buy a service to manage what they traditionally did. So if you think about probating an estate and the work that a lawyer would do to probate an estate, this is in effect a network that's been built that allows all of that work to be done, I won't say offshore, but done outside of the traditional law firm. And at this point, depending on the this is Australian, it depends on the particular regulations in play, whether those are services that can be provided by non-lawyers, but it won't be too long in my prediction that they will be available to non-lawyers. Legalzoom and CyberSettle have been around for years. CyberSettle holds itself out as the largest dispute resolution network in the world. And if you've never looked at it, and if you stop and think for a second about what it is that we do when we settle disputes, CyberSettle is built on the notion of game theory and says, in effect, the resolution of every dispute is like a game of poker. And many of us who negotiate know exactly what I'm speaking of. So we can create mathematical algorithms that in effect allow us to weigh what people will do in various circumstances. If you haven't looked at CyberSet, I'll look at it. It's a phenomenal way that people can go in, not lawyers, although it is available to lawyers as well, can go in to resolve their disputes. Legalzoom is the largest American network online provider of legal services, again, without providing legal advice, and if you can separate that, you're smarter than I am. They provide legal services across the United States and into Canada. So clients, if you think of the medical example, you are sick, you don't know quite what to do, you go onto WebMD, you ask some questions, you find out what you should do, you never go see the doctor. Legalzoom and its counterparts, and there are many of them, are the new phenomenon for our clients. But don't think this is radical stuff. This spring, in British Columbia, the government passed legislation to create the Civil Resolution Dispute Tribunal for small claims. And it has an online dispute resolution component, and its use is mandatory. So when that legislation is proclaimed in British Columbia, you will not be able to take a matter to small claims court without having gone through the Civil Resolution Dispute Tribunal. That is actually the court, but you won't have been able to take a matter there without actually having attempted to resolve it using online tools. So these examples, some of them have been around for years, some of them are fairly new. But the question I ask, and I think we need to think about, is if TurboTax can be available to allow people to prepare their own tax returns and has in effect taken that work away from tax professionals, will it be long before Turbo Law or its equivalent is available? So the final thing I want to show you really does push the envelope. And this relates to the application of artificial intelligence principles and technology to the practice of law. So, can you go to the next one, Glenn? So, QDoc is again an Australian company. It's actually a technology company, but they've decided that they want to look at whether they can do legal research simply using computers and artificial intelligence principles. And the notion is, if you put enough information in and you code it properly and you allow for the testing and searching of that information, you should be able to answer legal questions and, in effect, provide legal advice. And so QDoc's commitment, and it's an upstart company, it's hard to know exactly how successful they'll be, but their goal, in effect, is to do legal research online without a lawyer. Your opinions will be replaced by QDoc. And that is not too far away. So, and for any of us who might have watched Jeopardy last year when the IBM computer could beat all of the Jeopardy champs, it's not a big stretch. The ability and the development of artificial technology is quite rapid and will change what we do and how we do it. So those are just some of the things I'm seeing. I could find many other examples in many other places of many other phenomena. But what I think you have to think about, and what I think we have to think about as lawyers in Nova Scotia, and as I said, as the regulator, is that so much is changing. We are in the midst of a revolution. So many of the services that I've shown to you are available in Canada. And that means that law societies will have no choice but to address how we regulate lawyers. How do we regulate the virtual practice being offered by a law firm that has an address in Toronto? How do we regulate the practice by a law firm which has no address at all? And the change is occurring in an environment where the nature of regulation has changed, as I referred to, and technology is developing faster than most of us can follow. And though lawyers need not keep up with everything, as a profession, failure to be connected to the most relevant changes will present a real and present danger. Borders are disappearing. Law is being practiced in that cloud. The virtual practice of law has no physical location, and services are being provided from anywhere. Outsourcing of legal services and legal services processing to India and to other places is a phenomenon. So the competition for many is no longer just across the street. The competition is everywhere. There are huge opportunities for those who seek to take advantage of them. Will Tim Daly, as he described, use technology to allow his practice to be more effective? The pace and scope of change, however, will require significant mental, personal, and likely financial investments. There are huge demands for legal services that are not being met. We know that every survey conducted in Canada today tells us that many people cannot either afford or cannot find access to the legal services that they require, or that those legal services are too expensive. So for the profession, there is a huge unmet need. What many of the systems that I have shown you today, they will thrive for two reasons. They have bitten off small pieces, and they've done it really well, and they've systematized their work to make it more efficient. Many legal services do lend themselves to that phenomenon if lawyers are smart enough, energetic enough, and entrepreneurial enough to take advantage. And my conclusion, the future is unclear. It's uncertain. It's precarious for those who fail to embrace change. Many thanks.